This could be a small country halt. The trains that actually stop here can be counted on the fingers of one hand, but those that don't stop are 10 times more numerous. (1986). The TGV, the French high-speed train, is a success. The French railway company decides to extend its original Paris-Lyon line to Valence. To save time, the new line would bypass Lyon to the east, 20 miles from the city. In this way, trains wouldn't have to slow down and would continue to head south at 300 kilometers per hour. No stop was planned. And yet a station has been created here, Satolas, a new TGV station. Before the station was built, Satolas was the site of Lyon's airport. And since the TGV bypass line ran close by the airport, the regional council had the idea of creating a connection between the planes, TGV, and the motorway. But above all, the council wanted a symbol, a piece of monumental architecture to mark its territory. In 1989, it held a competition for a building that would symbolize the Rhône-Alpes region in the same way that the Eiffel Tower symbolizes Paris. The winning architect, Santiago Calatrava, has designed the station concourse as the required symbol. A monumental concourse visible for miles around, an expressive shape that everyone calls the bird. At the origin of this shape is a sculpture made by the architect 10 years earlier. It didn't represent a bird, but an eye. Personally, I feel that to carry out original and personal work, I have to spend some time in research first. In my case, this research work finds its expression in sculptures and drawings. Using this, I have created a vocabulary that attempts to be original in the sense of crossing the border between sculpture and architecture. When he won the competition, Calatrava was a young architect and engineer who wasn't yet well known in France. Born in Valencia in Spain, he had graduated in architecture in Barcelona before studying at the Polytechnic School in Zurich, a city where he now lives. Calatrava is fascinated by mobile structures, hangar doors, awnings, opening roofs, but he is above all known for his bridges, having built dozens of them around the world. At Satolas, once again, an obstacle has to be forged, the railway track. Calatrava's concourse crosses it like a bridge. I realized that I was designing a very important building for the region, one that was destined to be the gateway to the region. I believe this led to the idea that was to mark the spot where the station was situated, on this plain, with trees, a horizon, and small hills. And in the opposite direction, if the train was going in this direction, the idea was to span the passing train with an element that later on the plain would be recognizable as Satolas Station itself, even if the station is much bigger. On either side of the concourse, 400 meters of platform, the length of a double TGV train. Platforms with a light covering, indented at their extremities by 2 road bridges, the airport access roads. But how do you go from a 70-centimeter sculpture weighing just a few kilos to a building 140 meters long, 40 meters high, and with a 100-meter span? 12,000 tons of steel were needed to build this huge structure, which nothing is straight. Of the 600 bars making up the structure, only 2 are vertical. They're all set at different angles. To check the feasibility of such a complex structure, special software had to be developed. And yet the structural principle is much simpler than it seems. The structure is supported by arches. 2 concrete arches span the concourse's floor slab. 2 large steel arches on the outside. 2 inner arches supported by massive concrete piers that are contained in the lift shafts. The bird's crest comes to rest on the 2 inner arches that also bear the rising weight of the 2 large wings, relayed by the outer arcs. All the beam housings are encased in white concrete, inside and outside. To the west, a single housing supports the 4 arches, also outlined by a concrete coating, the bird's beak. This is the station's entrance. On either side, 25 beams are supported by concrete arcs to form the inclined structure of the northern and southern facades. Once the structure was in place, it simply had to be sealed with glass to form the concourse. The upper part of the bird's wings is cantilevered. To hold it up, a series of struts back up the beams of the facade and roof. Once the structure was complete, no wall or facing would conceal it. The metalwork joinery holding the glass in place is positioned and concealed behind the posts of the facade. The bearing structure is exposed, visible and stressed. A style of architecture that highlights the structure. This breaking down of motion in architecture calls to mind time-lapse photography experiments of the last century, a spirit seeking the essence of movement, an attempt to suspend time. There comes a time when the sculptor tries to seize a moment. He tries to seize, for example, the flight of a bird that rises up and hovers for a second, perhaps before falling again. Among the forces in play, you have time, except that I believe that the forces are movements, crystallized movements kneaded into a mass of concrete, into the steel, inside it all. Once you're inside Satolas, you no longer look at the shape. You're within the space. You've entered the sculpture. This is one big advantage architecture has over sculpture, since you can enter it and then it gives you a totally different impression. There was no question of filling the concourse with the usual clutter. Calatrava fought to keep the concourse empty, to give passengers what he considers to be today's sole luxury, space. A few benches, the automatic ticket machines, and the departure board for trains make up the concourse's only furnishings.
8 coming from Avignon and going to Pavillon, departure 1849 is about to enter the...
Only 2 large cantilevered terraces advance over the concourse. They were designed for the station's cafes and restaurants. Below them, set back from the concourse, the ticket counters and offices. These facades are simply the visible side of the service area located and concealed behind them. Indeed, behind the concourse, Calatrava has placed a small building that contains all the services. People have nicknamed it the backpack. The backpack's awning echoes the cantilevered wings. Inside, the terraces also form a cantilever, one of Calatrava's favorite figures, a sort of half-bridge that defies gravity and pushes forces to the very edge of imbalance. It's something that will hold you up, that will support you like this. This is a very basic manner of expressing a cantilever. A cantilever could also be an outheld hand. It could also be a wing. In other words, it's the extension of a body that remains hanging in midair. The branches of a tree are cantilevered. The wings of a bird are cantilevered. Rocks that outcrop at times, hanging above a sheer drop, are cantilevered. So you can see this isn't an unusual form. It's a form that is strongly related to in the way in which nature works. A pedestrian walkway links the station to the air terminal. The Lyon Chamber of Commerce and Industry that manages the airport also had a say in the project. Concerned at the arrival of the TGV on its land, it would have preferred an invisible station buried beneath office buildings. But the Regional Council and French Railways rejected this idea, and so all it could do was request that the new station wouldn't conceal the air terminal. The air terminal was built in the 1970s by Guillaume Gillet, a respectable style of architecture for Calatrava, who interpreted it in his own way. As a sort of reflection, he copied the general outlay of a central building with two low wings spread out on either side. The wings of the air terminal look like small marquees studded with canopies. Calatrava copied this idea to cover his platforms. The structure bearing the platform cover is a mesh of raw concrete worked like clay. No prefabricated elements here, apart from the slabs that close the full lozenges, but a structure entirely cast on the site in molds made with craftsmanlike care. I've always felt that concrete is a simple material, since it's made only of cement, gravel, and sand. But it's extremely rich where its expressive quality is concerned, since you have texture, color, and above all, shape. You can create shapes with a great deal of freedom. In my mother tongue in Valencia, we call it formigo, a material that can be shaped. Calatrava hereby pays tribute to the ideas of a great master, Nervi, a brilliant engineer and technician, who developed the art of supporting vaults of spectacular scale with an appearance of lightness in the 1930s. In order to unite the whole station site, the platforms, concourse, and gallery were given the same aluminum cover, studded with glass. The architect's work was due to end at this. The platforms are the preserve of the French railways, whose chief architect is Jean-Marie Dutilleul. The company wished to revive the myth of rail travel thanks to the TGV and its new stations. The design office determines everything from the technical constraints to the number of escalators via the platform furnishings that have to be the same throughout the network. Having obtained the commission, Calatrava was able to work within the company's private domain. The engineer's art, claims Calatrava, is the art of possibility. The infrastructure at Satolas is composed of 6 tracks. 4 tracks for the trains that stop there and 2 platforms for passengers. In the middle, there are 2 tracks for direct trains, enclosed in a tunnel to preserve the station from the shock waves of trains passing at 300 kilometers per hour. What could be done with the tunnel? Accept it? No, use it. It lies at the heart of the station, and so Calatrava made it the heart of his platform development. Here, the structure bearing the roof rests almost entirely on the tunnel. The lateral sections of the covering are therefore once again a sort of cantilever. They do not rest on the outer walls, but on the contrary, hold them in place like pinchers. The top of the tunnel doesn't only hold up the roof. Calatrava has made it the link between the platforms and the concourse. Large embankments have been excavated to let daylight in. To lend rhythm to the 400-meter-long platforms, Calatrava has designed a motif, a sort of V that plays on the full and empty spaces. Which element really has motion in Satolas station? The TGV, the train. The fact that a train is passing at 300 kilometers per hour can only be shown by extremely static structures. That's why the V and the crutch motif is repeated. Through this row of people, you have the train passing. That's the true element being celebrated at Satolas. On the tunnel wall, the same motif treated like a sculpture. Calatrava hasn't only decorated the tunnel wall. He has hollowed out the extremities, leaving only a sort of framework. In the end, we only retained these elements here that were going to support the roof.
Qui allaient donc porter la toiture eux-mêmes.
Little by little, the station dissolves, losing elements, and we gradually prepare for the end of the station, the point where the last element disappears, and from then on you have nothing but emptiness before you.
There's
the double approach, you know. There's a very real approach resulting from the skill of using concrete perfectly, of knowing how to use steel in a building, as all companies have shown. And then on the other hand, at the roof of all this, there's an almost surreal approach. In other words, outside reality, that leads to creating a building which, in its stability and static nature, simply celebrates the passing of the technical marvel of the TGV. Satolas station was completed in 1994. But the flight check-in counters at the station still aren't in use because of low passenger numbers. Only 1.5 of airline passengers arrive here by TGV. Satolas lacks a connection to the regional railway network, as well as air links to America and Asia. The air-rail link that was at the heart of the project is still on ice, which leaves the building. Just as families used to visit Saint-Lazare Station in Paris on Sundays in the 19th century or Orly Airport in the 1960s, people now come here to discover the most surprising building for miles around, a monumental edifice in the heart of the countryside.